Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Premier David Eby says he needs to speak out on issues that affect British Columbians, and that's why he's written an open letter to the Bank of Canada, urging it to recognize the impact of interest rate hikes and to hold off. Was he right to do so? We're taking your calls. After 12:30, fall means renewal, and it's time for our gardens to undergo a refresh. Brian Minter will be here with some tips, and as always, to take your questions. I'm Michelle Eliot. Welcome to BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. Welcome to you. And as I mentioned, Brian Minter joins us in about half an hour from now. So you can send your questions and any photos you'd like to share right now to bctoday@cbc.ca. Well, the Premier of British Columbia is issuing a plea to the Bank of Canada. In a letter to the bank's governor, Tiff Macklem, Premier David Eby writes, quote, "People in BC are already hurting. In your role as governor, I urge you to consider the full human impact of rate increases and not further increase rates at this time. The increased financial strain, poverty, and homelessness will lead to significant economic and social damage to our province and the country that will take years to repair." Now, the Premier sent the letter just days before the bank makes its next interest rate decision, and he wrote a second letter to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, urging him to take a bigger role in bringing inflation under control. Eby told the CBC he felt the need to advocate for British Columbians.
We're just seeing the beginning of the impact of this historic run-up in rates, and I can tell you it's devastating. And it's also shutting down badly needed rental housing construction in the province and the private sector because the costs of builders are going up as they borrow money to finance the building before the tenants come in. It's just, you know, it's so critical that frontline information, I believe, gets to the governor. I recognize the independent role, but I just couldn't sit by and let another round go because we're really seeing it in British Columbia.
That was Premier David Eby speaking yesterday to CBC News. Now, his letter and, of course, the issue of cost of living is top of mind for British Columbians.
A lot of the people that I know also live in BC and live in Vancouver, especially, to find a place more affordable.
As smart as David Eby may be or not, he's not going to determine what's going to happen with Bank of Canada interest rates.
Some views from people we spoke to in Vancouver yesterday. Now we'd like to hear your views as well. Should Premier Eby have written that open letter asking the Bank of Canada to halt interest rates? Is it appropriate for politicians to try to influence Bank of Canada decisions? And what does a premier and other politicians need to do to address inflation and affordability? We'd love to hear from you on the open line. You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or pound 690. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. And my guest is Ross Hickey. He's an economist and associate professor at UBC Okanagan. And we have reached him in Kelowna this afternoon. Hello, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, hello.
What do you make of the fact that the Premier wrote this letter, in particular to the Bank of Canada, with basically a policy ask?
Oh, I think it's ridiculous. I think it's a terrible mistake on his part. I think that he may have believed that it would have been a nice political move to show British Columbians that he is trying to do all he can to represent their interests. But it was terrible because the impartiality, the independence, and nonpartisanship of the central bank in Canada is extremely important, and he did a reckless act that put that in jeopardy.
Why do you call it reckless?
It's reckless because we don't want our central bank to respond to politicians at all. It's independent. It's akin to the Supreme Court of Canada. We don't want the Supreme Court of Canada to be responding to what politicians say in letters writing to them based on the decisions that they're going to make. We want the Bank of Canada to follow its mandate to pursue keeping inflation at a target of 2% per year. That's its only job. That is all it's trying to do. And to suggest that in some way it's not considering the full human cost, the people at the Bank of Canada know that inflation is very costly to people, that people really don't like the rising prices. And that's why we're going through the pain of having interest rates rise to try to bring inflation back down. I think that it's also misguided to suggest that rising costs of development are somehow the Bank of Canada's responsibility. Their responsibility is to set interest rates and control monetary policy. If the Premier would like to make it less costly for developers, he could defer development cost charges that are charged by municipalities, which are under his jurisdiction. Okay, so I just think it's really inappropriate.
Okay. And so, in the sense that he says he was speaking up on behalf of British Columbians, we have an email here from Anne who writes, yes, I think he was right to speak out. And what Premier Eby has said is that he's providing frontline information as someone representing the interest of British Columbia as to how those interest rate hikes are affecting British Columbians. You know, the Bank of Canada has said it relies on data to make its decisions. And so isn't it appropriate or just a part of his job to try and provide that information?
It's not part of his job. It's inappropriate. The Bank of Canada is measuring employment. They're measuring the consumer price index. They have Statistics Canada has many measures that are nationwide. I think that David Eby's information is more anecdotal than the information that the Bank of Canada is using. And the Bank of Canada represents the interests of all Canadians. I don't think that we want the Premier of Ontario to be influencing the decisions made at the Bank of Canada or the Prime Minister of Canada. So David Eby really should take a back seat on this and reconsider. I actually think he should apologize to the institution because he's jeopardizing our trust in the independence of the institution. What I mean by that is, imagine the Bank of Canada doesn't raise rates, which I don't believe they were going to do anyway. Now people may think, oh, that's because David Eby encouraged them not to. How foolish.
And given that the expectation among economists, the majority of economists, is that there will not be an increase on September 6th, what's your own expectation? And so what do you make or what do you expect will be the reaction, if any, from Governor Tiff Macklem to this letter?
Well, I think that the Bank of Canada is going to set its interest rate as they had been determined to do so, independently of David Eby's letter. I think personally, I believe they're going to hold rates where they are because the data suggests that that's a prudent move at this time. And I hope that the Bank of Canada speaks not just to David Eby, but to all Canadians and all Canadian politicians and restates the importance of the independence of the central bank from politics.
Okay. And so just before I go to our caller here, the Premier did acknowledge the independence of the Bank of Canada in making his statement. Does that assuage your
that's
concerns?
Silly. Look, if I write a letter to the Supreme Court Justice, asking them to change their decisions to suit my interests, and then I say, I understand you're independent, but I still want you to do something for me. That's just it's gobbledygook. Poppycock. I don't know what else to say.
Okay, you've used some pretty interesting, some strong words here already. Ross Hickey is my guest, economist and associate professor at UBC Okanagan, and we're asking you, what do you make of this letter from Premier David Eby to the Bank of Canada governor, saying he's stating the concerns, the impact of interest rate hikes on British Columbians, and urging it to halt those rate hikes? Is it appropriate for politicians to try to influence those decisions at the Bank of Canada? Do you have those same concerns about its independence and what this might do to the perception of that? And what else do you think the Premier could do to address inflation and affordability challenges? Love to hear from you on the open line, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email us your thoughts. That's bctoday@cbc.ca. Albert is our first caller now, joining us from Squamish. Hi, Albert. What do you think?
Well, Mr. Eby, I think, is doing the right thing. But my other big question is, who is this gentleman who's raising all the interest rates, and where did he get all his power from? He's not an elected official. What is he? Is this a senior bureaucrat? and increasing interest. It seems that the only person who's going to benefit from that is somebody who's loaning money. And anyway, I'm just really wondering who he is.
Okay, Governor Tiff Macklem, I would ask you then. You say he's unelected. Isn't that sort of part of the independence, that he is not someone who is reliant on votes to get into office?
Well, I don't know about his independence. I mean, he's a businessman who's connected with all the major corporations and all that, and not too sure that they're really in our best interest, some of those people.
Okay, connected to corporations. I'm going to have to fact check that with our guest. But yourself, Albert, how have these rate hikes affected you?
Well, it hasn't affected me too much. I mean, I go to the grocery store and everything's more expensive. I don't drive, so the gasoline's not there, and I don't have a mortgage. But I mean, I can see it around my friends and in small businesses having problems and that, and it appears a lot of it is increase in interest rates.
Okay, Albert, thank you very much for the call from Squamish, and let's just go back to our guest here, economist Ross Hickey. Just want to put that to you. You know, his points about the governor is unelected, and also just to go through those comments about being connected to businesses and things like that.
Yeah, so it's true. He is unelected. It's not true, to my understanding, that the governor is a lifelong civil servant, and he's not connected to any corporate interests. So I don't believe that's true at all. But just to remind listeners that before the independence of the central bank, we didn't have a clear mandate on how banking was done in Canada. When we made the central bank more independent and gave it a mandate to pursue inflation at 2% per year, we were freeing ourselves from the world we lived in before. If anyone is familiar with what happened in Canada in the 1970s, we had what was called stagflation. We had low growth and rising inflation at the same time, in part because it was difficult for people to appreciate and, I guess, expect that the Bank of Canada was going to take inflation as seriously as the Bank of Canada was going to take the low growth. So people were expecting interest rates to lower and for inflation to increase. And we ended up with this really bad situation of rising inflation and low growth. Having the independence frees us from that because we can expect that inflation will be what the Bank of Canada says it will be, because that is their only job.
And when it comes to that job, do they not have other levers? You know, something Premier Eby has pointed out as contradictory is that Stats Canada, in its own CPI report last month, says mortgage interest rates are remain the largest contributor to headline inflation, and that without mortgage interest, inflation actually rose 2.4%, which is pretty close to the target inflation. So, is it the only lever? Is it actually helping or actually hurting inflation and contributing to it?
No, so that's a good question. So I would say that anyone who's interested, I would suggest for them to look at the spreads between the Bank of Canada's lending rate that they lend to banks and what the banks are charging in their interest rates that they're offering to people taking out a mortgage. Those spreads are really high compared to what they've been over the last 20 years. Okay, so what's happening in terms of the mortgage interest rate that people are facing is that is affected by the interest rates set by the central bank, but it's the banking sector that's offering you those mortgages, and they're making more profits on those mortgages than they had in the past. So if we want to do something about that, that's regulated by the federal government. They regulate banking. We can talk about bank profits, but the central bank is controlling inflation with their interest rates. We've seen that the interest rate increases have been reducing inflation over the last year.
And you know that there are those who would argue the other side, that inflation is due to external forces, oil and gas prices, due to Russia's inflation of Ukraine, shipping and supply chain issues rather. What do you make of that? Can the Bank of Canada really do anything about it? Yes, go ahead, Ross.
Yeah, so that's great points. I think that's all true. That there have been these.
Okay, My apologies, Ross. I'd love to hear your response to that. We're just having some technical issues with you, so we're going to ask you, Ross Hickey, more about that, the factors that contribute to inflation. But we are asking our callers as well to weigh in on this question. What do you make of the Premier, David Eby, writing a letter to Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem, urging him to halt inflation and saying that it's affecting British Columbians? And Ross is back now. I'll let you finish your answer, Ross.
Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
no worries.
No, I don't know where I got cut off, but the external factors are part of what caused inflation. I think one of the largest causes of inflation is not that interest rates were so low before, but that we had CERB and other transfer programs that put cash in the hands of citizens, which were appropriate given the response to COVID. But those things did have an impact on prices, and luckily, the central bank is able to do something in the face of all these external shocks, and that's to adjust their interest rates.
Okay, let's go back to some calls now. A lot of people wanting to weigh in on this question. Should David Eby have written this letter to the Bank of Canada governor? And is it appropriate for politicians to try to influence Bank of Canada decisions? He says he acknowledges the independence of the Bank of Canada, but wanted to provide some information. And what could politicians do to address inflation? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Sheena is joining us from Victoria. Hi, Sheena. Welcome back to the show.
Oh, thanks, Michelle. Nice to be here. It was perfectly appropriate for Mr. Eby to send that letter to the Bank of Canada. It is his job to look after BC and the people in it, and every other living thing in it, too, by the way. We tried this in the 80s, and it was an absolute disaster. I lived through it in the 80s. So many people lost their houses. It was absolutely terrible. And only an idiot would believe that the governor of the Bank of Canada is going to kowtow to politicians. Plus, just one last point for Mr. Ross here. Mr. Ross, do you seriously believe that we can continue to grow economies by producing more things? Because you know what? The planet cannot take that.
Okay, growing the economy and growing more production. Sheena, thank you very much. I'll put that to Professor Hickey right now before I move on to the next caller.
Yeah. So, I think that we can continue to grow the economy in part by producing more things. But I think if you look at the economy over the last 100 years, we've shifted dramatically from producing things to producing services. And I think we can continue to expand the services that are available.
Sheena, thanks so much for the call. Zara is up next in North Vancouver. Zara, what do you make of this letter? Go ahead.
Hi. I think, yes, it is appropriate for Mr. Eby to make that call. I'm actually happy to hear that because I feel like after years, someone is doing something finally. I am a homeowner of 6 years, actually. Mm-hmm. And when my husband and I...
Zara, are you there? Hi, Zara, are you there? We've, unfortunately, Zara, is that you? Let's try one more time. Zara, can you hear me? Okay, I think we've lost our connection, unfortunately, with Zara in North Vancouver. She was just about to tell us about the impact of interest rate hikes on her. She's been a homeowner for 6 years, and she was sharing that her income is not keeping up with those rate hikes. Zara, if you can give us a call back, still love to hear from you, 604-669-3733. My apologies for that. Tim is our next caller now in Kamloops. Hi, Tim, welcome.
Hi. I'm a little confused by your guest there, and I was just wanting to ask him, is he saying that no politician should comment on the economy or interest rates? So would he then apply that to somebody like Pierre Poilievre, who suggested that the Bank of Canada had be fired, and that Pierre Poilievre is blaming Justin Trudeau using that cute little buzzword of his, just inflation, because he's blaming the politicians, and somebody like Doug Ford, who's with his Greenbelt controversy, supposedly saying he's going to alleviate the economic suffering. Meanwhile, he's making these sweetheart deals, according to the opposition, with developers. Like, I'm really kind of I'm confused as what should politicians then do? Just shut up?
What should politicians do? To what extent can they speak up?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I mean, if they, they're going to be damned if they do and damned if they don't for whatever actions they take. But to not say anything about the Bank of Canada rate sounds a little weird.
Is it different, perhaps, to speak up in media or using news conferences versus writing a letter to directly to the Bank of Canada governor?
Well, the thing is it's ultimately going to get out there. One should assume that it's not going to stay quiet if a politician writes a civil servant of one head or another the government corporation, so to speak. And that's true of the Bank of Canada. I mean, here again, we saw under Stephen Harper during the 08-09 economic recession, he spent money to support the big three auto companies. Was that a stupid move?
So this is about politicians,
Well,
whether it's intervening
or
or trying to
it's
influence.
very murky, and I guess it depends on where your bread's buttered.
Tim, thank you very much. A very good question, and I'll note that with regard to political criticism, we've seen Tiff Macklem's response to that criticism from Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. He responded at the time, as a public institution, he said, we, quote, welcome diverse views, we welcome analysis, we welcome criticism of our work and our decisions. We're doing that ourselves. But yeah, it's an interesting point, Professor Hickey. What then is the role of politicians in relation to those policies?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think politicians should comment on the economy and on economic policy, but politicians, I feel like I hold them to a higher standard than I hold the average citizen, in the sense that they should be protecting our Canadian institutions. Okay. And if they want to criticize those institutions or change them, they have the legislative authority to be able to do that if they're elected to the appropriate office. But I think that writing a letter to the governor of the Bank of Canada is very similar to what Pierre Poilievre was doing, which was also inappropriate. I condemn that completely as well. I think it is as ridiculous, only slightly less, because Pierre Poilievre is not the premier of a province. Okay, he's a member of the opposition. He's not currently governing. Okay, so I still think it's silly what Pierre Poilievre did. I think that lots of politicians can say very silly things about the economy, and they should be able to, but they should respect the institutions that we have in this country, like the independence of the judiciary and the independence of the central bank.
Okay, one more caller here. Thank you so much for all of your calls. Really appreciate it. Mo is joining us from Sept. Hi, Mo.
Hello.
Yes, what do you think?
Well, the premier should do what he's got the power to do rather than point the finger at interest rates. The province has control over PST on building supplies that go into the inflationary cost of construction today. The GST on the federal side, they could use their influence with the federal government to eliminate or alleviate GST on construction and on new homes, and they could deal with the municipal governments on development cost charges, building permit fees.
Mo, thank you. Go ahead.
For 1,000 square feet of construction today, you pay over $10,000 in building permit fees and development cost charges just to build a small home. So the province has control of those things and should do something about it before they start pointing fingers at other jurisdictions, is my view.
Thank you very much for the call, Mo. And Ross Hickey did touch on development cost charges a while ago as well. Some emails to the same view. Terry in Salmon Arm writes, David Eby, why don't you take some action yourself? Steeply progressive capital gains tax on houses to penalize flipping, progressive luxury taxation rates to make it less viable to build for the high end, or require proof of prior BC residents to buy or rent. John writes, David Eby has lots of mechanisms within his powers to lower the cost. There's nothing more than This is nothing more than passing the buck rather than doing something substantive. And so, yes, Ross Hickey, as we wrap up here, you talked about development cost charges, what the federal government might be able to do with regard to banking. What do you call on politicians to do right now then?
Well, gee, I don't know. I think that those suggestions that were just made by the last caller are all excellent suggestions. But I also think that the central bank is getting inflation under control. The cost of living, I believe, is not going to be rising as steeply as it has in the past. We do have problems in the province, like healthcare wait times and like housing access, and those should be the priority of the premier of the province.
Very good to speak with you this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
You take care. Ross Hickey is an economist and associate professor at UBC Okanagan. He joined us from Kelowna. It's 12:31, 1:31 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today here on CBC. We're on Radio 1, live streaming as well on cbc.ca/BC. On YouTube, you can find us at CBC Vancouver, or you can use the CBC Gem app. And waiting in the wings is Brian Minter. He's ready to talk about giving our gardens a fall refresh. And as always, he's taking your questions. You can email your questions right now too to bctoday@cbc.ca, and do send us some photos too. We'd love to put them up on the live stream. He will join us right after the CBC News Update. And here's Michelle Morton.
Good afternoon. Here are the headlines from the CBC Vancouver newsroom. BC Ferries is urging travelers between Vancouver Island and the mainland without reservations to board as foot passengers. The Coastal Renaissance vessel is still expected to be out of service until Thanksgiving, and that will reduce capacity along the popular routes. BC Ferries says this weekend is the fourth busiest one of the year for the corporation. This long weekend, the province is urging residents to take care not to extend what's been a record-breaking fire season. Minister of Forests Bruce Ralston says while most wildfires over the summer months are caused by lightning, the majority of fires that start in September or beyond are caused by people. So far this season, there have been more than 2,030 fires, with 416 currently active. And Ottawa has unveiled its proposed regulations under the Online News Act this morning. The federal government legislation is designed to force big digital platforms to pay for the news posted on their sites. Ottawa says the draft is released to address concerns the internet giants have about uncapped liability. Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, says the regulations will not change its decision to block Canadian news outlets. Now, a look at the local forecast from Environment Canada. Sunny today with highs of 22 degrees, except 27 degrees if you're inland, and clear for this evening, cooling down to 13. Now back to BC Today with Michelle Eliot.
Okay, I'm looking at the ferry terminals right now. It looks like they are mostly on time is what I'm seeing. And I learned yesterday, Michelle Morton, that you spent a lot of time and lived in Parksville when you were younger.
I did in Parksville, and
so you must have taken a few ferries yourself.
I have. I always enjoy it. I always like going to White Spot and getting a burger. But I hear it's not there anymore. Am I right?
Oh, it's there.
Oh, it is. Oh, good, Michelle Eliot.
I can report firsthand. They have their blueberry pies, French fries. Yes, they are. I did see White Spot items there.
Yum.
Rest assured.
And you mentioned you're going to go this weekend, possibly.
No, I went.
You did? Oh, you're
week.
right.
Yes.
So I'm sorry. It's Friday in my brain, apparently.
No, that's fine. And, my thoughts and well wishes to everybody who is taking a ferry or traveling anywhere around the province this long weekend. It's going to be busy.
Yes, it will.
Yeah.
What are your long weekend plans?
I'm going to stay right home. Yeah.
A local staycation.
It's going to be a lot of cleaning. That's my plan.
But that's like the best feeling after nesting, put on some music, and like you can sit down and relax and feel good about what you see.
The dust is piling up.
Oh, no.
Michelle, thanks so much.
Thanks, Michelle.
As Michelle Morton in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. You're with BC Today here on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming as well. Thanks so much for joining us. And we are heading into the Labor Day weekend. It means fall is coming and perhaps time for a fall refresh. Brian Minter has some tips for that. And as always, he is taking your questions. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can dial pound 690 on your phone as well. And our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. and master gardener and horticulturalist Brian Minter, of course, our longtime gardening columnist here on the show. He joins me now from Country Garden Limited in Chilliwack. Hello, Brian.
Well, Michelle, hi. It's wonderful to be here as always. And we missed you a couple of weeks ago. But the thing that we talked about this morning is so very important. It's been very hot. It's been very dry. It's been a smoky summer for virtually everybody. And in BC, and fall, I love September because we start to get those cooler evenings, which are so very important. Hopefully, we're going to get a little more rain, which is great for everything in the garden. But also a couple of very important things, Michelle. One is this is the only time of year, and many people do want to have them in the garden, whatnot, for the beautiful saffron crocus.
Oh,
this is a crocus that you plant now, and it flowers in about 3 weeks. They're absolutely amazing. And you see those little yellow anthers in the center.
Yes.
It only takes 1,000 of those to get 1 ounce of saffron. So you can't complain about the prices.
That's exactly right. And what a tough job to try and take them out, right? They're gorgeous, Brian.
There's a farm in Abbotsford who is actually doing that. So it's one of those things, this is the only time of year that you can actually do that. It was fun. And while we're looking at that, the other favorite of mine are the beautiful autumn crocus, the colchicums. They're a bulb. You just have to start with one. And gosh, they multiply over the years.
Wow.
We have a lady close by in Fairfield Island here who has about a 10 by 10 foot display of these. It just knocks your socks off.
Yes.
And they're an odd bulb. They're dry. They come up in flower, and they make a beautiful display. But the funny thing is, in spring, this thing comes up like a tulip leaf, and you say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't plant anything there," and it dies down. It kind of fools you a wee bit. But the autumn crocus coming in white and double and single, beautiful lavender colors. They're absolutely amazing. And one more thing while we're doing show and tell
I
here.
love it.
Okay. These little
speaking of beautiful
here.
Lavender, yeah.
Yeah, the garlic. There's many great varieties of garlic, but it seems most people are having the best success with the Russian red. And our neighbors who plant it will be planting it very shortly. Usually about the first day of fall is when most people start putting it in the ground. And so it's a great thing to have to look forward to all winter long. But it's the one reliable food that is very, very hardy across the province, and planted this late summer and going into early fall. Will give you wonderful crops, usually in July of next year, plus the wonderful scapes that people be able to harvest usually in June the following year to be able to have. So just a couple of reminders in terms of bulbs, and a reminder too that coming up in most garden stores across the province, you're going to find some beautiful bulbs of the snowdrops, the crocus, the great hyacinths, the daffodils, the tulips. It's going to be time to start thinking about those. So in terms of all the heat and everything we've had and some tired plants in our garden, these are some things that you can look forward to. And don't forget about the beautiful chrysanthemums right now that many growers across the province, Michelle, have been growing these beautiful mums for a long time. They'll be here probably till our Thanksgiving. And but when you're looking for instant color to pop up in your garden, it's nice to put those in porch pots on our front and just have them around. They lift our spirits. And other things too, as many things finish in the garden right now, we're trying to make new containers. The winter pansies and the winter violas, those are two huge things to be able to enjoy right now. And some of the fall grasses, gosh, Michelle, we talked about this morning, every time you get a bit of a breeze, these grasses just move in the wind.
Beautiful.
And they add a life to a garden that, so on, that we just need that little bit of extra. So it's a refreshing time to refresh, think about, things going in the garden that'll give us enjoyment into the late summer, fall, and even into the winter time, which we'll talk about later. But don't forget about the saffron crocus, the autumn crocus, the colchicums, and of course the biggie, the garlic.
Yeah, that's right. I love seeing the Russian red garlic. And that's when I know that fall is here, right? When I see those beautiful bursts of color with the fall mums at the gardening stores. And I thought, yes, it's here. Brian Minter is here joining us. And as always, he is taking your calls, whether it be about fall refreshing your gardens or other questions as well. Love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Jane is first up. Let's head to Campbell River. Hi, Jane. You have a question about root vegetables.
I do. Hi, Brian.
Hi.
We amended one of our garden beds a few years back as per your suggestion for root vegetables with the sawdust and the sand and the other thing. And we had perfect root vegetables that year, but this year there's been tons of growth for the green part of the plant above the ground, but we're not getting very big turnips and carrots and beets. And my daikon seems to be a little deformed this year as well.
Okay. I know it's been a stressful year, but I think the answer really is to get, and you still have time to do it, I would get to higher phosphorus and potash in around those roots right now, because we still have all of September. We get pretty good growing time. We can get some warm temperatures, but if you can get some nutrient, something like a 10, 15, 19, it's flower and veg food made here in British Columbia around now. It will make a difference. It takes a week or so to get established, but it will make a difference in that short period of time. So just 10, 15, 19 now, and you still got lots of time to size up some of those roots.
And once we've amended that bed with the ingredients, do we need to do it again down the road?
Yeah, you do. And as much as you're getting good growth, and that's a good sign. You get nitrogen in your soil. But putting some of the manures in, compost, mushroom compost and some of the manures in the soil will enrich and put the organic matter in. And but at the same time, you're going to need that higher phosphorus and potash next year again, not when you plant them, but when they start sizing up. That's a perfect time to be able to do that. And just you about the very important talking about soils next year. Remember, regenerative gardening is the way to go. Don't leave the soil bare over the winter time. In other words, leave a bit of residue on it. You shouldn't leave the soil bare at any time. But the big one is being able to put some of the winter crops, so the fall rye, the winter peas, the winter wheat, and so on, to stay green and build up our soil for next year. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's such an important issue that we should be looking at over the next few weeks.
That's so true, Brian. And Jane, thank you very much. Sounds like you've still got time to get some perfect beets and carrots. Oh, sounds delicious.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the call.
Thank you.
That's
Good
Jane.
luck.
Good luck to you, Jane in Campbell River. We have an email now and a photo as well from Gary, who wrote us from Abbotsford. And Gary writes, this apple tree was transplanted to our yard in early spring 2022, and it is failing to thrive. Oh, look at that. It really looks quite dry. Hey, Brian, I don't know if you can see that that photo that we have up on our live stream right now, but it is certainly looks like it's not blooming at all. It is in full sun, well-drained soil. It's about 8 feet tall. There has been no new growth whatsoever since it was moved. Its leaves are sparse, small, and somewhat curled. Yeah, I can see that in the photo. It produced no fruit last year, only a few apples this year. I see one in the photo there, Gary. And so we have watered consistently, Gary writes, and used 12-5-8 fruit tree fertilizer. We would appreciate any suggestions you have for what we could do this fall or next spring to save it.
Yeah, I'm so glad we're talking about that right now, because at this particular time, the tree has struggled. It's been a tough, without roots well established, because it takes a few years for roots to get established. But there's three things that we need to do right away. Number one is the soil needs to be some additives to it, as in sea soil. I love that. To really enrich and build up that soil. That is very, very, very important. And so let's work that and dig it in right now. Good time of year to be able to do that, because even though the tree will stay dormant over the winter, the roots can be active. So it's getting those roots going. The second thing I would do is, and this is awfully important as well, is get what is called a root booster. It's a liquid type of nutrient that many people use today instead of bone meal. Because it's liquid, it's phosphorus basically to really encourage the roots to go in. So enriching your soil, getting the root booster in that soil to actually develop those roots. And I would do it 2 or 3 times over the winter time to make sure that we're doing everything we can. And then even a bit of a pruning. The third thing is prune the tree back a bit, take any branches off like that, get it right back to the core, so that the tree roots don't have much to support. They need to develop, and as they start developing, start growing, then they're going to force new growth to start coming in the tree. So those are critical things. I'm glad you got a hold of us, Gary, because we need to do that right now. And again, when we water, with water restrictions, we understand they're still in effect, but water thoroughly and deeply and especially when you're putting a root booster in to get that nutrient right down to the roots.
Okay. Yeah, really, really practical advice. Gary, good luck to you. I hope that root booster boosts your tree. Okay. Thanks very much for emailing us. It's bctoday@cbc.ca if you want to do so as well and send your question in for Brian. Right now, we have another call, though, from the Free Spirit in Pemberton Meadows. Hello there.
Hi there.
Hi. Thanks so much for calling. And what's your question?
My question is, I've got a big field of pumpkins this year, and we did them all from seed.
Mm-hmm.
And they seem to be finishing quite early, they're quite orange already and quite big. And I'm just wondering if they're going to die where they are, or if they'll keep growing through to October.
Right.
Yeah, that's and I'm so glad you because Michelle and I talked about that this morning.
That's right.
How the critical thing right now? What are the leaves like at this particular time?
They still look very green on 90% of them for sure.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. Then they're going to continue to grow over the next 3 or 4 weeks. And, don't get water on the leaves, but if it's been very dry, of course, and, the pumpkins will tolerate that to some degree. But if you can get a little water, there's no point fertilizing at this point, but just leave them as long as you can. And the pumpkin growers are telling us that you can't harvest any pumpkins until the leaves start to die down. When the leaves start to die down in earnest, then the pumpkin has a maturity where you can harvest it and make it last. But yeah, at this point here, if you've got green leaves, we've got a field of designer pumpkins, and they're all green leaves. They're all growing right now. I have no intention of harvesting for another 3 or 4 weeks. Absolutely, yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time today, guys.
Oh, thank you very much for the call. Yes, I was very interested in pumpkins. Want to know when I can get them. Margie is on the line in Nelson. Hi, Margie. What's your question for Brian Mincher?
Hi there. Hi. Thanks for taking my call. I have just acquired a new property, and I have a lot of Tanzi on it, and I have been battling it and trying to eradicate it, actually. And I'm wondering, do you have any suggestions on how to deal with it, because it's got very long roots?
Yeah, and thank you for bringing it up. I appreciate that. We're on the side of the BC Invasive Plant Council, and Tanzi is an invasive weed, absolutely.
Yeah.
One thing, sometimes it's good to prevent them from producing seed, which they do very readily. So if you can, a weed whacker, whatever you have to go through, and get them, preventing them, get those yellow, basically flowers off the plant to stop them from producing seed. That's one step in the right direction. The other thing is you can, and I find, pulling them out is a bit of a tough one, but I use a ladies' V-handled fork. I find that very active to be able to get in and be able to get them out quickly. And they come out, I know they've got longer roots, but I've been taking them out for some time. And I know you can actually do that. And again, talking to the folks at the Invasive Plant Council, I mean, sometimes because the weed is invasive and it's causing so much damage, you have to use a herbicide in some situations. And, they're not that everybody likes to use glyphosate, but in some cases, at least put the glyphosate on, because that'll go down and kill the roots. And if you don't want to use that, certainly a vinegar solution, it is actually sold as a Roundup right now, but it is vinegar, pure vinegar. That is another way to get a hold of it. But because they have invasive roots, truly, if you can get them out, but the meantime, get those flowers off. Very, very important to stop that from spreading.
That's how they spread. I'm reading here. Oh, so go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say what I've been doing is pulling them out, getting as much root out as I can, and then what I've been doing is pouring salt and vinegar down into that, into the opening where the root is, because it just seems like I can't get to the bottom of the root very easily. So,
yeah, I appreciate that. You're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And and thank you. You're one of the few people concerned about this, and we all need to pull together. It's costing over $1 billion to our provincial economy in dealing with invasive plants and animals as well. So thank you for that call. It's so important.
Margie, thank you very much. I'm reading here, Brian, that, good luck to you, okay? That Tanzi is toxic as well. Are there any precautions people need to take?
I think if you're sensitive, like first of all, I deal with everything with bare hands, so I never have a problem with them. But where some people are more sensitive, we just wear gloves.
Okay.
That is probably the very most important thing to be able to do to keep it off your skin.
Yeah. Okay. There you go, Margie. A little bit of another tip for you there. More questions coming in for Brian Minter on the open line. Our number again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone as well. By email, if you'd like to get your gardening question in, it's bctoday@cbc.ca. And let's head to Kitimat now. John is waiting with a question about garlic. Hi, John.
Thanks for taking my call. Hi, Brian.
Hi, John.
Brian, I used to grow nice garlic, big ones here in Kitimat. Now, for the last few years, I can't. And to get into the onions, too. I think I have what they call white rot.
Yes, white rust,
Anything?
yes.
How can I prevent that? Do you know anything?
Yeah, well, first of all, start out with, can you put the garlic in a new location this time of year? Is that possible?
Yeah, I got a garden about 50 feet by 50 feet. And I plant them in every corner of the garden. It's been like this for the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And
where you've been having some rust, if you could maybe put them in a different location this year, I think that's absolutely very, very important. We've had bits and pieces of it on many callers in the spring. We've had situations like that. The other thing is when you plant your garlic stalk, make sure it's clean. Even if you have to purchase some new garlic, starters or the cloves and break them up and so on, make sure they're very, very clean. That's awfully important. So well-drained soil, garlic, and we putting a lot of the growers are telling me they love mushroom compost in with garlic to get them going. But it's a new location, good soil, well-drained soil, mushroom compost, and then watch them as they start to grow. Because up in Kitimat, I mean, you're not that cold. I've been in Kitimat. It's a wonderful area. But the thing is, they should be January coming up. Just keep an eye on them to make sure that the green shoots are clean of any type of rust. And remember that your sulfur, old-fashioned garden sulfur, is the control for rust. So if you can keep an eye on it, keep on top of it over there, I think you're going to be okay this coming year. But if you do those things, you're going to be great.
Okay.
Okay. Well, excuse me. What do you mean by garden sulfur? Is that some kind of fertilizer?
Oh yeah, no. It's a natural substance. It's a fungicide, is what it is, and it's one of the few fungicides that are left in the market. Some forms of it are organic, but the point is, it is the control for rust. So if you have it on hand and you see any sign of it, mix it with water and spray it on. It will control that and keep it in check for you.
Okay. Good luck to you, John. Thank you so much for the call.
Thank you, John.
Take care. John calling about his garlic and onion suffering from white rot. Good luck to you. Jan is our next caller now in Victoria with a question about pruning raspberries. Hi, Jan.
Hi.
Hi, Jan.
Go ahead.
Hi, Brian. I have a heritage raspberry patch, which has already borne fruit for the first part of the season and is now covered in fruit for the second half. But I wonder if I can prune out the canes that are already born, or do I have to wait till the spring?
Okay, no, that's a really good question. For ever-bearing varieties of raspberry, what you do, Jan, is cut them to the ground. When they're finished for the season, everything gets cut to the ground. If you want to cheat a little bit, and some of us in gardening get away with a few different things, save a few canes where you'll get some of the fruit earlier as well as later. But with ever-bearing raspberries, to the ground. So if you're not going to get any more, you don't think any more fruit off the, some of the ones that had born earlier, simply you can get rid of them right away. But don't forget, they'll keep producing till the end of September and October, so you might get some fruit. So I would hang on a little bit, unless it's a nuisance for you, before you do prune them back. So at this point here, basically leave them, trying to, at the very tips, you'll see some fruit and flowers starting to form, and on the ones that already produce, they will produce multiple times.
Interesting.
Some good news for you, Jan. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh,
Bye.
Bye. I love the look of raspberries and the taste.
Oh, they're great.
Thanks for the call, Jan. Marilyn is also calling us from Victoria with a question about probably my favorite thing about fall. I know people say pumpkin spice. Mine is butternut squash. And Marilyn is calling us from Victoria now. Hi there.
Hi, and hi, Brian.
Hi, Marilyn.
I love butternut squash, but struggle to get them to set fruit. They seem to throw out all kinds of male flowers and very few female flowers. And I don't know if that's a weather issue or spacing or watering. What can I do next year?
Mostly watering. We've run into this early in the season with the summer squash, with zucchinis and so on. Please don't water them. Let them dry out, let them toughen up, because if you stop watering right now, cucurbitas and that whole family of squash are very, drought tolerant once they get established and get growing. Even if they wilt on a very hot day, that's okay. But stop watering. And if you stop watering, you're going to still get pollination, and you still have time from scratch, early September, to get those butternuts to actually produce fruit. So basically, back off on the watering unless they're exceptionally dry. That will turn things around for you.
That's good to know, because I've been watering twice a week.
Oh, there you go.
Probably too much.
Yeah, good luck. Good luck, Marilyn. Thank you very much for the call.
You.
Yeah, I hope you get some good butternut squash out of that. We have an email here from Grace, who asks, this is a question I'm interested in because my son is involved in the gardens at school. Do you have any recommendations for what to plant in a school greenhouse and garden beds for the fall? What plants can we put in that children can look after? This is great for the start of the school year.
Yeah, it is. And the greatest challenge we have with school gardens is, of course, when school ends in June, that's where everything begins to ripen. And it's the volunteers over the summertime that keep those school gardens going. And thank you for all those volunteers. But at this time of year, there isn't much. First of all, do try some garlic, because it's a good experience for young people to plant that. That's certainly one thing I would take a look at. The other thing is, don't forget about perennial vegetables. And the novelty of growing them. And I'm thinking, for example, like Jerusalem artichokes. That's a historical plant that produces sunflowers the next year, but produces little roots, and encourage, things like that. Rhubarb could be put in to be able to watch the rhubarb develop over the year. Horseradish, if you want horseradish, that's it. But those are the type of root vegetables that they are, in fact, vegetables. They're just perennial vegetables that we take a look at. But the other one here, and you still have time if you can get some seed, please look at the winter lettuce. I would look at the corn salad lettuce. I would look at winter density lettuce, which is a kind of a romaine type. So let's get some winter lettuce planted right now.
Lots to start for Grace. I made a few trips to the school myself to help my son water this summer. Brian, thank you so much. Have a great long weekend, okay?
Thank you. You too. Take care.
Brian Minter is our gardening columnist. He'll be back in 2 weeks. And thanks to our team here, Rachel Adams, Alan Regan, Mariam Gamar, Greg Kisser, George Baker, and Mark Fairfield. Thanks to Rafe Arnott, Amber Parmar, and David Jones. I'm Michelle Eliot. Have a great weekend. Thanks for joining us.